Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Archaeologists in Quarantine. Today, I'm joined with special guest, Jens Notroff. Hello, Jens. How are you doing?
Oh, good evening. I'm fine, thanks. Stuck at home like everybody else, but really looking forward to talk to you within the next hour. So thanks for having me here.
Oh, thank you so much. So originally, we were supposed to have this interview 2 weeks ago, but unfortunately, due to some scheduling and personal issues, we had to push it to now. So hopefully, it goes well. Fingers crossed, we don't have any technical issues because you all know how it is during a live stream. But we're all super excited for this introduction into visualization of archaeology and Göbekli Tepe. So, Jens, I think the first thing is, what got you into archaeology? What inspired you?
It's I mean, it's a complicated story, like with everybody ending up in the field. Of course, I'm a kid of the 80s and 90s, so a certain movie archaeologist may have had created some initial interest in the field, but actually it even started a bit earlier when my father dragged me through all of Berlin's museums, East Berlin's museums back when, I think at the age of 4 or 5, when my brother was just born. We were every weekend, we were out in the museums to just left my mom and the new baby quite home, at least for the weekends. And I remember particularly a couple of Berlin museums, and especially an installation in the old exhibition here in the Bode Museum, where some, I think it were Neolithic burials were exhibited in a kind of cave-like, dark lit room under glass in the floor. And this definitely somehow caught my fascination, that there were skeletons with all kinds of stuff buried. And I was really curious why these bodies were there with tools and vessels. And this is definitely a picture which will stuck with me and may have created this kind of fascination in the beginning.
It's so important, I think, for us as we, especially as children, maybe able to go to see these historical sites, visit the museums, interact with it, and hopefully get inspired by
I
it.
think
It's amazing how
it lays out some kind of basic interest. I mean, if you're following these interests as a teenager or not is a different story. But at least to be aware of the variety of stuff out there you could be interested in, I think that's definitely something which is starting at this early age. Yeah.
And especially in Berlin,
Yeah.
there's the museum island. I remember visiting it.
Yeah.
It's there's I don't know, there's never enough time every time I visited.
And days there actually, yeah, if the museums are open, that is. So
Exactly. Same issue we seem to have here in the UK. For our viewers at home, by the way, if you have any questions during the live stream, please put them in the comment section. If you're on Instagram, head over to YouTube, and once again, write in the comment section, and we'll hopefully be able to answer all your questions. So the topic is visualization of archaeology. And it'd be great maybe to have like an introduction into this concept, because for many people, it's quite new. It's new terminology for a lot.
I think actually it may feel new, but it's a pretty old horse, so to say. Archaeology is a very visual discipline. I mean, we've got this unique method of source acquisition. We use excavation to produce the data we start our research with. And the problem with this kind of method, of course, is that by retrieving our data, we also destroy part of the source. And this is why in archaeology, documentation is essential. It's an integral part of our work in the field. And part of this documentation always has been and still is to this day visualization. So even with all the technological innovation we use today with 3D scanners and with reconstruction of whole trenches, of small finds, drawings, in particular drawings, remain an important documentary tool. And this is something I've got very interested in as of late, for one, because I'm dabbling in drawing myself, so it's a nice way to spend some time. But I'm also very curious about these old excavators field notebooks, because this is the, yeah, maybe we can put it as the raw material of the data we are later processing. So this is something which really caught my interest lately, and I was trying to follow how the whole process from the field notebook to the final publication, or to the final reconstruction, also to the visualization of the data perceived in the field. And this is something which really is nothing new, but maybe we are rethinking it now with the technological approach we now have to documentation. I mean, I could just underline this with a couple of images. Just a second. Let me share my screen. Wait a second. So, boom, 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 boom. Sure. Wait a second. I'm not sure if I see my PowerPoint here in the screen sharing options.
Let's have a look.
It was there during the test, but let me. There it is.
You got it? Ah, there we go. Perfect.
And now we're here. So what I was talking about is this whole visualization aspect. If you're looking at this picture here, this is usually what you would find in a museum or in a history book. This is how we imagine the tools we were excavating, in this case, grinders, Neolithic grinders, were actually used and put to life. So this is already the end of this process. This is the image we are producing from the raw material in the field. Now, on the other hand, what I was mentioning is this whole field notebook, field notes approach. So I guess pretty everybody of our colleagues has a little notebook in the field to scribble down all, like you see here, if it's just measurements or a quick sketch of the latest feature you were excavating. So this is the raw material, and this is the basic data we later process in the whole documentation process. I mean, we know that at some point we start with the 1 to 10 drawing or more detailed drawings, but in the end it comes down to these field notes. And the interesting thing, what really interests me here, is how this all came into place. And I think it's probably no coincidence that early archaeology has strong ties with art and artists, and that among the earliest archaeological expeditions, artists were very, very present. I mean, if you think of Catherwood, for example, or even Walter Andre and his watercolors, but also Howard Carter, who in the end started as a draughtsman in Egypt, copying hieroglyphs and so on. So arguably, the field notebook probably is not necessarily the satisfying scientific documentary tool, and is never meant to be published. So this is something we do for ourselves, but it adds a very specific level to the visual documentation and characteristics. So that is what I would outline as the whole beginning of this process, and what actually is my interest in this field. In the end, drawing forces us to examine an object, to perceive it, to experience it, and to process its materiality. I mean, this is, in my opinion, an important key factor in archaeology as a whole discipline, to process what we're finding in its whole materiality, in particular in prehistoric periods where we're strictly limited to the material culture we're excavating. And thus, I think drawing allows us to contextualize what we're researching. It allows us to reduce and to focus information. So this is what I meant by reflecting the physical and material reality of the objects we're excavating. And of course, this already includes an interpretation. This is already translating the specific object, a specific moment, feature, and maybe what's most important or most fascinating also in this context is that in contrast to a photo, which suggestively appears to be very objective, which as we all know, it is not, but it appears objective. A drawing from the very beginning always clearly is a subjective document, and it always screams, this is interpretation. So yeah, this kind of dichotomy is something I'm really interested in, to be honest. And finally, the whole visualization aspect, of course, is something we could and we should need and yeah, utilize in communicating our research. I mean, what we're doing here is, of course, is an outreach format. We're doing this to keep people interested in archaeology, to keep actual current research results out to the public. And of course, visualization is an important tool to do this. I mean, if it's this kind of infographic I just put up here, or the whole idea what archaeology actually allows us to see beyond the historical sources, actually, this is where I think visual graphics become very handy in the whole science communication process of archaeology. So yeah, in short, that would be what I mean with the whole approach to visual archaeology, to the visualization in archaeology.
Listening to you there, and how you're speaking and seeing it from a slightly different perspective, someone who of course works in archaeology myself as an excavator or field archaeologist or CRM archaeologist. Every country has its own terminology for what we do.
Yeah.
And seeing how you portray that, it's so true in the sense of how we, of course, document archaeological deposits. It's not just digging. Yeah. There is so much more to it. And of course, visually, how we interpret something, everything from the context, the color change, everything like that.
And it's so much more. It's so much more than just the. I mean, if you're just breaking it down to the general public perception of archaeology, it always goes down to the object. But interestingly, the object is the least interesting thing in the whole process. I mean, it is a data set, and it has a certain amount of information. And if it ends up in the museum, it makes a great display piece. But in the end, what we are really into is the context of this object. This is what's telling the actual story. And this is something you hardly can put into visuals with the object alone. And this is what I meant with the surrounding approach. So what we're doing actually is creating context, reading context, translating context, and creating context.
And then we're somewhat correlating that information with things around and able to draw in places of locality, so something local, and then on a broader prospect.
I think a good thing, I'm not sure who wrote this, but the whole differentiation between photography and drawing is that also in language, you take photos, but you make drawings. So this is already in our understanding of how we use these tools. There is a different approach to the creative process behind this.
And there is now, so for our viewers at home who may not know, we, as Jens mentioned earlier, we do scale drawings, and we may do it like a 1:1, or we may do 1:10, 1:20, depends on the situation. Now with technology, there are some archaeological companies and research projects that are using photographs as a basis instead of actually drawing. They're experimenting with this aspect, but I still prefer drawing and the sketchbook. You need a sketchbook.
I think in the end it comes down to personal preference, but yeah, these new technologies are quite interesting, and I had the pleasure and luck to also work with some of these technologies, and it's quite interesting that of course you're saving time this way, because you create from a high number of images a very detailed depiction of an excavation trench or a feature, and could these images, once processed into a 3D visualization actually. You could draw all kinds of information. It could even produce a drawing, a computer-made drawing from these photos. But what I meant with the translation process when doing a drawing is actually the part of interpreting what we're already drawing. And this is something I think is still lacking in the technological process. So the drawing is good and it's there, it has all the details, but sometimes in the field you see something you want to emphasize in a drawing. If it's just a piece of charcoal or very, very interesting kind of soil color, which maybe in the photo does not appear that strong due to the light circumstances or so on. So this is where I personally still see an advantage of drawings, but of course the whole documentation process is in the meantime technological perfectly covered. So we're not a discipline, we're looking into the past, but we're not a discipline living in the past. So it's we're aware of modern tools and of course using them.
Exactly. So well put there. Moving on. Okay, first of all, let's do a quick hellos to some of our viewers. Hello to Barbara, and Alex, Rose, Angelina, and Paths Unwritten. Hello to you all and everybody else. Again, if you have questions, please don't be afraid. Just ask. It's okay. So, in your experience as an archaeologist, what is your main research focus?
I actually started out as an Bronze Age archaeologist. So this was my focus during time in university and also in my master's thesis and in my dissertation. So European Bronze Age, basically. And there I became focused on what we would put as Northern Central Europe and Scandinavia. So my main focus in the last years, my still not finished dissertation, is a phenomenon from basically focusing on what's today Denmark, the Danish Isles, but there are also some finds reaching out into northern Germany, Norway, and Sweden. And this is a quite interesting phenomenon actually, because there, with the introduction of cremation burial in the Bronze Age, somehow the whole funerary ritual changed, while in the rest of Europe, grave goods became, in particular metal grave goods, became more and more rare. In Scandinavia, in Denmark, this was also the case for swords, for example, the famous Bronze Age swords. But if you would like to call them warriors, in Denmark somehow felt the need to be still buried with a sword, and they decided on a symbolic sword, a miniature sword. So basically just this size, and this is a very peculiar find group, really restricted to this geographic area, to burials. And this whole phenomenon of miniaturization kept my interest and was one of my research foci. Still is actually, because it's not finished, as I just told you. And the other period and region which really kept me busy the last, I think, more than 15 years now, is the pre-pottery Neolithic in Anatolia, where I was very lucky to have been a member in the research project staff of the excavations of the German Archaeological Institute in Göbekli Tepe, where I spent months every year on the excavation for the last, I think, about 15 years. So wow. I was an active member of the project until last year. I still owe some publications, but I left the field research in the project when I changed my job position. Yeah.
It's amazing, 15 years.
It's quite a lot of time, and it flies. So it's really, thinking about it, it didn't feel that long, but that's how you realize that you're growing old.
I think when your dissertation is finished, it'll be great to maybe discuss that at
Yeah,
some point
yeah.
in a future live stream. That'd be very interesting for our viewers. So of course you mentioned Göbekli Tepe. For our viewers at home who may not be familiar with the site, would it be possible to have like a quick,
Yeah, sure.
if you can, a quick introduction? I mean, it's an amazing archaeological discovery, but just for our viewers, if possible.
It is, and I think there are a lot of people who maybe can even tell also quite interesting stories about research there. So, but looking back through at my time there, and because it also somehow plays into this whole visualization thing, because a lot of these ideas I am now rethinking and developing actually started there, because I spent so much time there, and I already always had my sketchbook with me and did a lot of drawings in the field. This is where these ideas yeah, took shape. So yeah, Göbekli Tepe actually is a pre-pottery Neolithic site in southeast of Turkey, near a town called Şanlıurfa. And it has been first mentioned in a report in the 1960s, where it was noticed as a Neolithic site due to a lot of stone tools, lithic tools lying on the surface. Really, the surface was really covered with yeah, basically chips and flakes and a couple of tools. And the Göbekli Tepe is a mound, so it's a mountain actually, a very impressive landmark. So it's definitely something visible from afar. So it somehow dominates the surrounding landscape, and maybe this is also one of the reasons why the site was chosen for what makes it now so prominent. And this is monumental architecture, and it actually defines they are among the oldest yet known monumental architecture. So it's circles, stone circles, consisting of a couple of T-shaped pillars. This is the very characteristic. Maybe I could show some images as well. If you're talking about drawings, it would be easy to demonstrate this a bit. So yeah, this is the mound, and quite interestingly,
I don't see anything, sorry.
Oh, sorry, wait, I should restart sharing my screen.
Okay.
Let's have another look. It's always techniques. So
live stream, the beauty
of live stream, yeah. So if Zoom allows me to share my screen again, that's weird because the option, here it is. And there we are. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah. So what we're seeing here is the shape of the mound, and which actually is quite interesting. This dent in the middle is what gives the whole mound its modern name. Göbekli Tepe basically can be translated as a mound with a belly button or a belly hill. So this is probably where the name comes from. It is quite interesting. The site has, although the architecture was not discovered until excavation started under Klaus Schmidt in 1995, that the mound itself in local perception always was something special due to this tree up here, so-called wish tree. This is a phenomenon in the region where at some places, usually in the mountains, on the mountaintops, yeah, very special trees are situated where the local people go to yeah, tie some pieces of cloth into the branches connected to wishes. So it's that would be a story alone worth following, why certain places over time seem to remain special to the population. But what makes this site archaeologically so interesting is the architecture, the monumental architecture I was telling about. And maybe go back. This is these are the T-shaped pillars, and they are erected in these circles, as we can see them here. And the interesting thing is that this actually has to be dated into the 10th millennium BC, so it's 12,000 years old. And these pillars are usually up to 5.5 meters high. And the interesting thing really is these are monolithic, so are cut from one piece, and the quarries are in the surroundings, so it's not that far the resources are all there. Maybe this is also a reason why this place was chosen. And the interesting thing is that this T-shape actually represents a very abstract stylization of the human body. So it's anthropomorphic sculptures, if we maybe want to call them like this. And I admit I had a hard time in the beginning to process this, but I was finally convinced when we reached in the excavations this part where you clearly can see that these larger than life sculptures actually have hands, and they have belts, and from these belts are loincloths hanging. So this is, it's hardly arguable that this is meant to depict something human-like, human-shaped, but again, highly abstract, and with 5.5 meters, definitely larger than life. And the interesting thing is that this is not owed to deficient craftsmanship. So if these Neolithic hunter-gatherers would have wanted to depict something natural, they could have do this, because they did. We know some life-size sculptures like this one here found in Şanlıurfa, in the next bigger city, which clearly is a natural depiction of the human body, and it is with, I think it's almost life-size. So it is clearly in contrast to these larger sculptures, these larger T-shaped pillars, which seem to be I'm not saying they are depicting something different, something special, and I'm far from using words like gods or deities, because this is something we cannot prove in these prehistoric contexts without any written sources, without any idea about the belief systems we are confronted with here. But interesting is that at the site itself, we also found what seemed to be remains of these sculptures, and these are these heads we see here in the museum display, but only these heads. So for some reason, in the process of maybe demounting the ritual arenas there, the heads there left on site and were deposited, while the rest of the bodies was either brought away or is now so fragmented that it's hardly recognizable. What we see in this so-called Overman, the Jenny Mahale sculpture, is there's also a breaking area in the neck here as well. So this might be just a static problem, that this is, of course, one of the weakest parts of the whole sculpture, which has to break at a certain point. But it's interesting that we find these heads in these enclosures, in these stone circles, and it almost looks like they were put there on purpose. So in a nutshell, this is a very quick tour about the site and what I was doing there. Interesting maybe in terms of interpretation, but this is something which is still ongoing, and the colleagues are doing some amazing research there right now, and I'm pretty sure there are a lot of more and new information coming to light with ongoing research. But what always kept us quite interested or quite a bit hesitating regarding the interpretation is that typical domestic traces and domestic architecture seems to be rare, and this led to this interpretation having some kind of special, maybe ritual side here. But this is something we maybe should discuss again in a couple of years' time, when more is excavated, when more of the finds are processed. And in the meantime, even other sites in the vicinity, because Göbekli Tepe is not the only site which produced T-shaped pillars. There are some other sites in the vicinity, and some of these are now under excavation as well by a just started Turkish excavation project. And I'm really looking forward to learn more about the results of these excavations, because this helps to somehow puts Göbekli Tepe on the cultural map of the area, and it helps to take away a bit of this special status, because it's not a unique site. There are more sites like this. So maybe this is something we definitely will hear more about in the future.
And what type of material is this stone? Is it limestone?
It's limestone, and yeah, it's limestone, and it's local limestone. So as I said, the quarries are really a couple of 100 meters around the mount and the rock plateaus, and it's really soft limestone. So it's easily to be worked with the available stone tools. Yeah.
Did you find any stone tools
There were,
inside?
there were a lot of stone tools in the vicinity, in particular flint, of course. The whole mount was covered there. When I was there in the first, my first times, I still remember that in the sunlight, these flint tools were glittering like it was like a carpet of stone tools. In the meantime, it's a bit reduced, of course, due to research activity on one hand, but also due to increasing tourism. But it's still a very prominent site for stone tools. The interesting thing maybe is that these limestone banks is appearing together with natural flint deposits as well. So all the necessary material would be there. And we also found in these quarries kind of atelier situations, so where you could see where the stones were retrieved and worked. Yeah.
Yeah. So Barbara actually asked what type of tools did they use to carve such detailed sculptures. So we just answered that will be stone tools. It's amazing. I think it's great when we actually find the flints as well nearby, and I can just imagine, as you said, like this heap of them. It's quite remarkable. It
takes away this air of mystery which still is created around sites like this. This old, how could they have done this? It's magical. What kind of technology did they use? In this case, we're pretty sure we know what kind of technology they use. And since the limestone really is rather soft, I can easily imagine the process of creating these. Yeah.
And we just have a couple of questions from the viewers.
Maybe I should just.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine.
So, okay, so we can see each other again.
Hello. So we have a few questions coming in. Let's see. Were the majority of T-stones intact at the time of excavation?
Yes, the majority, I would say yes, because these buildings were backfilled at some point. Were partly backfilled at some point in time. It's also still ongoing research and huge discussion how these processes actually were taking place and over what kind of time. But since they were covered, they were pretty well preserved, and only a few fragments were sticking out of the surface, which was then used as for farming purposes in more recent times. So, but yeah, the whole covering process helped to preserve it. Yeah.
And in regards to the excavation side, how much has been investigated?
It's difficult to say how much of something you don't really know how big it is already excavated. I mean, there were geomagnetic surveys done, and there's a lot of site, so the extension of the site probably rather perceived. But giving clear numbers would be difficult. It's probably more than the 5% which is circulating around the internet. This definitely seems to reflect an older state of research.
A few more questions.
An interesting side note here is that in archaeology, of course, at least if it's not kind of rescue archaeology, we also do not have the aim to completely excavate a site, because as I said in the introduction, in the beginning, excavation means destruction of the context we're using as our main source of information. So usually we're trying to preserve as much as possible, and you're not start to dig at any point, but you start digging to answer certain questions. And once these questions are answered and you've got an idea, and there's no reason to excavate any further until you have new questions you want to answer. And this is why complete excavation also never really should be the first option in archaeology, I think.
100% agree with that, actually. And we did have a question from one of our viewers, Delby. Thank you for your question. They asked, I hear that they won't dig up the whole area, which is brilliant, as this will be preserved for even longer. Is this true?
It's just, yeah, this is what I just
exactly.
said, that we're not aiming to excavate.
It's quite important, I think, for people to realize that we only excavate if we have to. Well, as you said, we have a research purpose. In my sector, in the commercial sector, it's all to do with the development. Like, it's going to be destroyed if we don't go and do something about it. We are rescuing it.
Yeah. So that's I mean, that would be, in this case, would be the research question, to document anything before it's being destroyed. But on the other hand, if you got the chance to leave something, it's always a good idea to leave something, because if you look back how archaeology developed over the last 100 years, and how we now, I mentioned my interest in these old field notebooks, these, which are great and very detailed, but we also know the famous Schliemann Trench, for example, which in this time was an archaeological approach he was following. And today we were quite shocked if we would do something like this. So in 100 years' time, I'm pretty sure that a lot of colleagues would look back at what we are doing now, and they would wish that we leave something for them to then recognize and analyze with the state-of-the-art tools they have at hand then. So.
Exactly. I think it's so fascinating speaking with you today. I just would love to visit the site. We had a couple of questions in actually regarding access. Is it only for archaeologists at the moment, or is it open to the public?
At the moment, we're talking about a very special situation with the whole pandemic, and I'm honestly not exactly sure about the current situation in the southeast of Turkey. But last year, the corona pandemic really hit this part of the country strong. But usually, in the normal circumstances, the site has become a kind of tourist site in the meantime. So there's a visitor center, a great visitor center was created. There's a visitor path, so people can actually visit the site. And there's a huge museum in Şanlıurfa, in the next bigger city, which also, this is what makes this really worth a visit, which also houses a life-size replica of one of these buildings. You could actually enter and you could walk around. And it also has a building from Nevalicori, another site not that far from Göbekli Tepe, which was excavated in the 80s. And Klaus Schmidt, the discoverer of Göbekli Tepe, was excavating at Nevalicori as well. And this was the reason why he was aware to recognize what the site actually was when he visited it prior to excavation. And Nevalicori was the site where these T-shaped pillars were discovered for the first time. They are a bit younger there, and but also already have these characteristic hands. And the building which produced these T-shaped pillars was dismantled because Nevalicori was excavated actually as a part of a rescue excavation in the construction of the huge Ataturk barrage. So the site would now be on the ground of this huge lake which was created there. But it was dismantled and was rebuilt in the museum a couple of years ago from the same person who dismantled it like 20 or 30 years ago. So quite a great thing. And you can see it now right next to the Göbekli Tepe reconstruction, which really shows the connection in the pre-pottery Neolithic between these sites and in the whole vicinity, actually.
Wow. Oh, I really would love to go there. It's definitely on my list. And I'm sure most people who are watching today would love to visit that site. So hopefully in the next few years, we'll be able to go back, pandemic and all. Of course, as we're talking about Göbekli Tepe, we're going to have people who have read certain books and even seen publications or journals, if you like, and news articles maybe about pseudo-archaeology. How does it feel to be on a site that has so much attention and you know, dealing with that element?
It's of course at one point it's quite annoying that the own research you're putting out there is less consumed in the public than these very exciting pseudoscientific claims. But on the other hand, maybe this is also part of the problem, that it's at some point our responsibility to make these data accessible. And it was actually working on this site which really pushed forward my interest and engagement in science communication, because I noticed that while there are tons of data and scientific interpretation on the site, it's clearly played no role in the public perception of the site. This was dominated by conspiracy theories or really weird, pseudoscientific interpretations from Atlantis to ancient aliens. And this is why I really started growing an interest in science communication, to make this kind of research more accessible and more visible. Because if you're honest, we're producing a lot of data, but in the end, it's a special interest club of people consuming this data. And this is the scientific community. These are our colleagues. The public, I think, this has changed in the meantime a bit, but usually the public did not play the major part when we were thinking about presenting our results. And this is something which thankfully is changing now, with a lot of people engaging in science communication. And what we're doing here right now is nothing else than reporting on archaeological research to the public, making these data accessible. And this is why I think that it's important to also address these pseudoscientific narratives and to offer an alternative, to not just say this is weird, this is bad and wrong, but to offer an alternative, to say this is what we are saying about the site, and we are working on the site, they are doing this kind of research, and yeah, look for yourself. Here's the data. This is how we interpret it. This is why we arrive at this interpretation. So this is the best we could do, and we should do, I think.
And there's something that you mentioned, and I think it's quite important for us as archaeologists and in the science world, is that the main issue, I think, is that it takes time to go through the data, to understand it before we even say it within peer-reviewed journals. And then you have the public domain. It's a really long process. Yeah,
that's maybe one of the most important things here, which also sometimes is not really perceived in the public discussion. We are talking about a long process from the moment of excavating in the field, which is the production of data. When we need to process this data, it starts with cleaning all the stuff. It starts with cataloging. Then we need to find comparisons, parallels. Then you start building up an interpretation. When you produce something written about this, and only when this is published, you have the moment to go to the public then. Because of course you cannot talk about unpublished material because you want to make it waterproof. You want to have all your references there. You want to have your data right. So yeah, it's taking time, and maybe this is one of the key issues we need to create a bit more of awareness when it comes to the perception of archaeology. That it's a very, I wouldn't say slow discipline, but a very careful and very demanding discipline to have everything straight in place.
Agreed. And even how can we make information more interesting, more tantalizing? I think that's another issue, is how, as you said earlier.
I think this is also very important, because one reason why these very fascinating and exciting pseudoscientific narratives are out there and are so much consumed is that they are interesting, that they are well presented. And of course, as archaeologists working in prehistoric periods, we often have to be honest enough to say, well, we don't know for sure, but we have this and that idea. While these more popular narratives are much more to the point, and they are coming up with all kinds of fantastic interpretations, but we are more hesitating because, well, after all, we're still scientists, and we rely on our data, and we want our data to be presented properly and carefully. But yeah, I agree that we also need to create a more attractive approach, a more attractive presentation of our data. And I think this is where we close the circle to the whole visualization process of archaeology, because I mean, archaeology is a visual science. We are working with objects, and this is maybe one of the things we could really work with. We could put out there. We have a lot of images. We had a lot of possibilities to create very graphic content, and this is exactly what I meant in the beginning with the approach to create some kind of visual archaeology.
And especially with Göbekli Tepe, it's the iconography.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and I think probably this is what makes people, you know, so intrigued about the site. The different images that we see.
I mean, this pre-pottery Neolithic iconography is very, very special in itself. And I've shown these very abstract T-shaped pillars, which alone look very modern to us. And maybe the shape is also owed to the size of these things, and you just put together what you can. If you're just going back to the images, maybe I can show something else in terms of iconography, because yeah, this is this T-shape. We discussed about these two spheres of sculpture, human-like sculptures, these larger-than-life pillars and these life-size sculptures. And we have a lot of interesting other finds in the region, like this. This is it was quite an oddity. It's also limestone stele from a site of Killisig, and it was found in the 80s, I think, 70s, 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And it ended up in the local museum, but nobody had an idea what it is because it's so special. There were no parallels known at that time. And that's an interesting thing, because once Visualisation was excavated and Göbekli Tepe was excavated and these T-shaped pillars were showing up, this somehow made sense now. It looks like another version of this whole T-shaped pillar thing, but now mixed with these naturalistic sculptures we also know, which places it somehow in between these two spheres. And this is something really interesting, and which this also illustrates that archaeology is a process of accumulating knowledge and analogies, because now we can say something about this find, but when it was discovered, it was unique, it was an oddity. And this is also the archaeological process which helps us at least mentally visualize these kind of finds. But returning to iconography,
just quick, sorry, yeah. Just Jens, 1 moment. If we could go back to the last slide.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm assuming as well that this is erosion because it's limestone. It's an easily erodable material. So, I mean, it's very interesting. And obviously, apologies for the cat. The one to the right, this image that you have here, I'm assuming that's actually been damaged maybe by later.
You mean this? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this one.
This is, I put it up here because another group, if we would call like that, is that besides these naturalistic sculptures and these larger-than-life sculptures is something we would call composite sculptures. There's one from Visualisation, and this one here is from Göbekli Tepe, and you can see it's a composite creature with a lot of arms, a lot of being stuck upon another. It's actually not eroded. I think the head up here was removed at some point in time, maybe in the process of dismantling for whatever purpose it was originally meant to maybe to avoid some profanization or whatever. But I put it up here because this also ties into this Killisig sculpture, because you see here it's also some kind of composite creature with more than one being at least. We have these arms here, and there are more arms here. There's another body here and the head. So what this Killisig sculpture seems to represent really is something, it takes elements from all these other groups we have. We have the large T shape, we have the rather naturalistic human appearance, but also this composite character. And this is why I put this up here. Yeah, so there's a lot going on in Neolithic sculpture in the region, obviously, and still a lot of material for research, for future research, I'm pretty sure.
It's amazing that's 12,000 years old as well, or around that time period. It's amazing.
Really amazing, yeah. Just to imagine when this was created, and yeah, and this is what I meant with the iconography of the site, because this is something which also brings us very close to these people creating these sites. And this is a small selection of the typical kind of images you would find on these pillars. So they are very rather naturalistic animal depictions, and not surprisingly, a lot of animals which necessarily have some importance for Neolithic hunter-gatherers. So there's a bit of game depicted, like aurochs and gazelle, but also a lot of snakes and foxes, in particular foxes. And what I find quite interesting is, for one, that this is this really naturalistic depiction of these creatures, which tells you something about the observation skills of these hunter-gatherers and of how I put this into stone. That's quite interesting. And I was always quite curious about this specific depiction of foxes. And an interesting tidbit is that when the actual sex of these animals is depicted, is indicated, it usually seems to depict male individuals. So this is something also quite interesting to note about the iconography there. But it's also interesting to note that there seems to be a very close connection to the hunters themselves. So these animals are probably depicted hunting. So this typical pose of this fox resembles what we know from hunting foxes. If you ever seen fox hunting, and there are some really cute videos on YouTube, if you could Google this, they are leaping, in particular in winter, this is quite interesting. See these leaping foxes jumping down into the snow for mice and so on. So this is one thing about the iconography, a very naturalistic depiction of the environment and of narrative scenes. On the other hand, it also seems to be kind of maybe we can put it as mythological narrative depictions. There are some really odd depictions of birds, for example, like these cranes, which clearly show an anatomy which somehow does not look what you would imagine from bird anatomy. And this led Klaus Schmidt already to the idea that maybe there's much more going on here, and that maybe this is depicting masked people in the process of either taking on a crane costume, or if we, without diving into the whole shamanism discussion now, in the process of changing into the animal and purpose of ritual. Interestingly, these crane depictions are also very, very important among the PPN iconography. So there are a lot of crane depictions. And there are also typical depictions of dancing cranes, because this is a typical crane behavior. They are dancing and joining dances once started. And to just finish this up here, why I put this on this visual interpretation of the whole thing as well, is that at another site in Çatalhöyük, there was a crane bone. The bone of a crane wing was found. And according to the interpretation of the archaeological analysis, it may have been part of a costume, because there were some drilled holes in there, which look like it could have been attached to strings and then attached to a human body as a crane costume. And interestingly, cranes would join a crane dance even if initiated by a human impersonator, so to say. So this is really fascinating, and that somehow closes my interest in the discussion of visualization of archaeology, because all this is, of course, the result of a lot of thinking about material culture, of a lot of images, collecting parallels and analogies. But in the end, we have to put it together into quite an interesting and fitting narrative. And this is where the whole visual aspect comes into play again.
Quick question: this is all watercolors, or is it pen with
watercolors? This is watercolor. Yeah, this is
watercolors. Wow.
It's the easiest way in the field actually to just get some contrast into these images. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. Doesn't it? It kind of looks like you've created something like this, like more with, like an app like Procreate or something. It's amazing that is like really the watercolor. It's so vibrant. There's so much to it.
Well, digital drawing has its advantages because it allows to make mistakes, and you are much more happy to experiment with stuff. Of course, in the field, it's much more practical to have a sketchbook and a field drawing kit with you, and that watercolor is the medium which works best under these circumstances, actually.
And for our viewers who might be interested in seeing some of Jen's work, if you actually click in the description box, you'll see a link to Redbubble, and you can actually buy some of Jen's prints as well. I just wanted to put that in there because they're very cool. Very.
Some glimpses into the sketchbook, but I think my main purpose still is earning my money with archaeology as long as I can. But I admit that this whole artistic thing is something which really keeps me fascinated. And of course, I know that dabbling in art is much less fruitful than finding a job in archaeology. But it's interesting that in archaeology, and a lot of archaeologists actually seem to share this this notion, art somehow plays an important role when it comes to not only documentation, but to also process our finds into a narrative. So this is something really really fascinating. It's kind of an intersection between the scientific part of archaeology and the storytelling part of archaeology. And this is why I'm so fascinated with these early pioneering archaeologists and the profession of the expedition painter, which in the meantime has vanished. So it's a special interest field to do some drawing outside the whole documentation process. But interesting, it's in particular archaeologists who are doing this in their spare time in excavation. So I'm far from being an exception. There are a lot of colleagues doing some kind of this just for fun. And there seems to be a special breed of people attracted to archaeology, it seems.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, I know I've just checked the time. I just realized time flies when it's interesting topics. It's been okay. I'm going to try, if possible, if it's okay. We'll go through a few questions.
Okay,
if that's okay. And for our viewers, don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe. What else is there? Oh yes, Jen's also social media links are in the description below. He's more on Twitter and Instagram as well. I just want to put that out there. Okay, question time. I'm going to try and find, okay, they're all quite in-depth questions. Okay, Angelina would like to know what type of software you use for your art, for your drawings.
Yeah, so basically most of it is still done an analog medium, so a sketchbook, thicker paper and watercolor. But if I do some digital art, it's usually on the iPad with the iPad pencil, and I'm using Procreate, which is an app which allows you a lot of freedom, but is so easily to use that even I understand it.
It's definitely something that maybe one day, I'm terrible at art actually. I'm never going to try it, I don't think.
Yeah, but the good thing about this digital art is that I know this fear in front of paper and colors, but in digital art you can easily just try something out, and if it's not good, when you erase it. I mean, even in paper, it's okay. If it's not good, you're doing this for yourself, so who cares? Just trying keeps you trained, actually. So this is general advice, maybe.
We have a question from Digger with Raven. Hey, Raven. And she asked, do you know if there are any plastered skulls or modified skulls that have been found at Göbekli Tepe?
Not as far as I know. There are, I mean, this is more a phenomenon of the southern Levant, actually, but there are examples from Çatalhöyük, for example. There, I know at least one from a burial, but not from Göbekli Tepe, as far as I know. I've got the idea that maybe these separated sculpture heads somehow reflect the curiosity in this replastered skulls, but this would be a discussion on its own, and quite an interesting research topic, actually.
It would be. Do we know the exact function of the site?
Will we ever know the exact function of the site? I'd say probably not. with ongoing research, our picture is getting clearer. So at the moment, I think I'm quite happy with the idea that was some kind of social hub where people were meeting for exchange, for maybe ritual activity, and maybe also, yeah, just coming together for certain activities.
Okay. Right, next one. I'm trying my best to be concise in the questions. Okay, in regards to the population, so the people who lived there at that time, do we know anything about their everyday life? Were they farmers? Were they engaged in hunting and fishing?
Yeah, we know that they were hunter-gatherers. We know this from the cultural context. We know this from the animal bones found on site, which were typical hunted species, aurochs, gazelle, wild species. But they're at the advent of food production. So this makes the site so interesting. So despite the whole monumentality and everything, what I find particularly interesting is really the chronological and social setting of this whole thing. We're at the doorstep of farming here. So this is where something really important is going on, where something is changing, leading right up to our lives today. So our way of living today in cities and food production is in some way starting in this time and in this region. This makes it so interesting. But these were hunter-gatherers. About population, it's hard to say, because usually you would need, you would estimate this with the help of burials, and we don't have much burials from this period and region. So our best guess would be to look at contemporary hunter-gatherer societies.
I really would like to go there and see it for myself. And it's actually a great question from Richard, who asked, I'm not sure if you'll know, so it's okay. Are there any plans to make the site accessible to people who can't travel there through VR models, for example?
I know that the museum already has some kind of VR experience in the internet, so you can visit the museum and also the finds from the site and the replica of this this building. Regarding accessibility of the site, this is something I could not really answer, because this would be something to local tourism associations and so on. But I think there are at least kind of 3D images available online from the Ministry of Culture.
Yeah, normally also Google. I think it's Google Arts and Culture app. It's an app, and you can click on any museum. Generally speaking, most museums, you can click and you can sort of view a gallery of some sort. Okay, let's try. Last question. About the foxes. So Barbara says that's amazing capturing the foxes, as I know the genetic lineages of them were dated from North America. How do you think they got there? Good question.
I'm not really firm to say much about it. It's interesting to know that they.
I did not know that.
But I'm not a geneticist or a zoologist enough to answer this question, I'm afraid.
But I would say that seeing animals depicted, doesn't matter where you are in the world, when you see animals depicted, I love that, because we see what is going on at that time.
Yeah. And what's important to these people, I mean, even if they focus on certain animals, it must be for a reason. They must connect something with these animals. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's been so interesting speaking with you today. I need to stop using the word interesting. It's been a captivating discussion about not only one of the most famous archaeological sites, but about visualization of archaeology as its own sub-discipline, because it's so integrated into what we do. But in the public domain, maybe not as much. We don't really approach it in the same way. So I think it's been really eye-opening for our viewers today. And if you do have any questions for Jens, please, you can leave them in the comment section, and maybe at a later date, we can do another live stream chat. Something like that we could do. Jens, anything to add before we go?
Not much. Stay safe, everybody. Wear your masks out there.
Agreed.
And yeah, exactly. And let's hope we're able to go places anytime soon. So stay safe, everybody.
Brilliant. For our viewers, again, see you next week. And let me just see. Oh, what is that question? Nope. Okay, that's fine. Brilliant. Again, thank you, Jens. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me.
Seriously, it's been brilliant. Okay, for our viewers, see you next time. And we've got a new video dropping in the next few days, so check that out on the channel. And we are off.